Welcome to Issues, and I'm your host, Richard Smith. Some time ago, we had Karen Dyer on with us. She's a bereavement counselor, and time ran out. I don't know if you could say that talking about death was interesting, but there was some information that she was sharing with us that was just hair-raising, and we never did get an opportunity to complete that. So Karen Dyer is back with us again, and again our focus will be bereavement. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, we're going to pick up where we left off. We started to talk about tasks of grieving, and we never did quite complete that. So let's pick up. What are some tasks of grieving?
Okay, so I think we left off last time, and the first task of grieving was accepting the reality of the loss. So we've covered that. The second task of grieving is working through the pain of grief. Now, our society, we don't like pain. We don't like sadness. We want everything to be Disney. Mm-hmm. Most people want it to be happy. Put on a happy face. Well, when we're grieving, we have feelings that are not nice feelings. Difficult, conflicting feelings such as regret, sadness, loneliness, guilt, sometimes anger. Not everyone experiences anger when they're grieving. But we need time to feel the pain and acknowledge that we're having these feelings. And that sounds a little strange, but most people are so uncomfortable when they do have difficult emotions like that because they just don't know what to do with them. Most people, death and extreme things that happen that cause us grief, we don't get them, they're not everyday occurrences, so we don't have a lot of familiarity usually with those extremes of emotions. But I think also as we're conditioned as children in our society, we're just conditioned not to express a lot of our feelings, especially sadness. When kids are crying, Mommy often says, "Oh, there, don't cry. Here, have a cookie, have some milk." We try to get kids to stop crying. Teenagers, when they're having a tantrum and cry, are often told, "Go to your room, or I'll give you something to cry about." Yes, yeah. Maybe not anymore. That's certainly that's maybe my generation. Yeah. But I think parenting still, we don't acknowledge our children's sadness. Yeah. So when we get to be adults, we don't acknowledge sadness. We feel uncomfortable when people are sad. As soon as they cry, we give them a tissue.
So what I hear you saying then, there are some natural feelings that come when someone is grieving, mm-hmm. and we should not be in a hurry to get rid of them because Absolutely. It's a natural part of the grieving process.
Absolutely. So having a cry is fine. Having moments of sobbing and weeping and really wailing is fine, but culturally we tend to be, perhaps it's our British influences, I'm not sure, yeah. but we tend to sort of be tough and keep a stiff upper lip and not, people talk about how people were really strong at the funeral because they didn't cry. Mm-hmm. So we hide our feelings and we isolate.
That may not be necessarily good.
No, I think what happens is all those feelings get stuck in us, mm-hmm. and they come out in other ways.
Now you said something. So somehow of preventing or trying to be the tough person and not cry, not feel sad, if we repress those feelings, they may actually be expressed in other forms.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that we do when we have anxiety, and suppressing emotions can give us anxieties, we have to, we do things like some people will drink alcohol to suppress emotional feelings. Some people smoke cigarettes to take the edge off. Some people use drugs. Some people have sexual addictions. Some people, they call it retail therapy. Some people go out and shop, yes, right? Yes. When they have anxious feelings, and they may not even recognize them as anxieties. Mm-hmm. So when we have a lot of emotions like sadness and regrets and guilt and anger, we can suppress them by feeling that we're in control by doing something else. So often if we suppress our feelings, our behavior it'll come out in our behavior.
So what are some other tasks of grieving that you can mention?
Right. So what I was saying is, just to stick on this one, grief counseling is actually a good way to explore these difficult emotions, because sometimes people just need a little guidance and they need to be given permission. So the third task, according to this is research that William Warden writes about. The third task is adjusting to an environment in which the deceased is missing.
Yes.
So it's not, we sometimes think, okay, what does that mean? So that means that we have to just adjust on 3 levels. The first would be external adjustments, so how the death affects everyday functioning in the world for the person or the family that's left behind. So who drove the car? Who picked the kids up from school? Who was the breadwinner? Who paid the bills? Who paid the mortgage? Who made sure that the supper was cooked or the groceries were shopped for? Who mowed the lawn? All of a sudden, it's not, you see, what grief is remembering the definition that grief is all of the conflicting feelings that come up whenever there's an end or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. When a person dies, yes, of course, it's a huge loss of that person, but it's also all the other losses. So the external adjustments of all the other things that person did in your family.
A vacuum is created. That's what I'm hearing you say. You mentioned who pays the bill, who buys the grocery, and now a vacuum is created.
That's right.
Sometimes you may come home and the person that deceased, before they deceased, they might have been watching television. They might have been sitting in a favorite chair, and now that's no longer there.
That's right. And even when people are really ill for a long time, we get used to having a person who's ill in our homes. And even though they may be really sick, they're still there. So when we go home, it might be really difficult to go in and open the door and find that the person's not there. The other part of this is internal adjustment. So it's adjusting to your external world, but also your internal. How the death of the person that you love affects your sense of self. So, people have said to me they feel like part of themselves has died.
Yes.
Because our relationships can be so entwined with others, especially if you think about marriages that last 50 or 60 years. There's maybe not as many of those around anymore, but there still are in our elder population. I know my own in-laws have been married for 60 years. So these people have grown up together. They are almost one person.
Yes.
It's like part of you.
Karen, is that why sometimes when those who have been married for a long period of time, when one spouse dies, the other one just seems to waste away and soon die?
It's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? That does happen. There has been research on long marriages where the spouse is that one dies and the other dies shortly afterwards, just because of just all those adjustments. There's so many changes. It's just too much to get used to, and they have almost like a broken heart.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting area to work in. Yeah. And then of course that question, who am I now? Again, when this is why grief counseling and bereavement counseling comes in handy, because people struggle with who am I now? What's going to become of me?
Let me ask, that who am I now question, is that because the surviving spouse had tied too much of themselves in the spouse that passed away?
Not necessarily, could not just necessarily be with a spouse. If your child died, we question, am I still a mother? If your mother dies, am I still a daughter or am I still a son? So when someone we love dies, it sort of makes us question who we are in relationship to others. So even though your mother and your father may be deceased, does that make you an orphan? I don't know. Yeah. So people struggle with these sorts of questions. The third adjustment, of course, is spiritual, because death is a life-changing experience for most people, who's the people left behind.
Right. Yeah.
It often pushes us into questions about our faith, People talk about having their faith shaken. People talk about, some people are even have a stronger relationship with their faith, but others who are very religious people sometimes get really distressed because their faith is shaken and they don't even know if they can trust God anymore.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing, death really impacts an individual myriads of ways.
Many ways. Yeah.
And I can see where a bereavement counselor could be needed, because sometimes you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going, you don't know what lies for you in the future. It can be a whole ball of confusion.
So we talk about sort of existential crises or an existential awakening of the meaning of what to do next in my life. So it's it can be quite an interesting, complicated period of time for people, and to have some help to get to navigate through that. That's where bereavement work can be helpful for some individuals. Some people don't want to engage in it, and other people find it really helpful.
Right.
And then, of course, the last task of mourning is to emotionally relocate the deceased and move on with life. So that means being able to, now that's kind of strange, isn't it? Emotionally relocate the deceased. Yeah. Because what happens is, when the person first dies, is pretty much it's right in the front of all of our thinking. We can't stop thinking about it. The memories, all these adjustments we have to make, it's always right there. As time goes on, it's less, the edge comes off slightly. I'm not saying you ever forget the person who's died, but what happens is, as you work through these tasks or stages of tasks of mourning, we find ways to honor the person's memory, to memorialize them, often with birthdays and anniversaries and visiting graves, and sometimes just talking to the deceased person. Many people say, now don't think I'm crazy, but I talk to my husband or I talk to my son. And I say, oh, I don't think you're crazy. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's okay. So we find ways to remember the person, and by doing grief work, you can remember the person, recall the person, and not have all of those difficult emotions that go with it at the beginning. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it sort of it's just taking the edge off the pain. Yeah. By acknowledging that you have pain, by saying, this really hurts me, my heart is broken, working through all of the things that may need to be worked out. You may have had a bad relationship, or you may have had one day where you had an argument, and talking about those things can really help you put them into perspective and remember the person without all the pain.
Yeah.
Now, all of these tasks, they don't go like that in a line.
Oh.
They're all mixed up. So we do them all at the same time. Some people, we go back and forth, often with anniversaries. After the first year, people say, I feel worse now than I did at the beginning.
Yeah. So with these tasks, there is no chronological order in which they come in. They come in all jumbled up. Yeah. Karen, time is against us again.
Oh, it can't be.
Yes, it is. But guess what? You are going to be coming back with us, and we are going to continue talking about bereavement. We've been talking with Karen Dyer, bereavement counselor, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Issues, and we have the pleasure of talking to Lamel Burch, a certified public accountant, and we are going to talk to him about budgeting. And the first question we're going to throw at him is, Lamel, when making a budget, where do you start? And in fact, in these economic times, before we ask that, can one exist well financially without making a budget?
It is easiest to function without a budget when times are great.
Okay.
You don't really have to worry about money if you've got lots of it coming in. But even in those situations, it's best to have a budget because that helps you to manage those funds well. A budget is an essential way to manage your financial quests or your financial journey. None of us set out on a road trip without mapping out our course. And that is very much the same mindset that we should take in planning our financial journey, in mapping out how we're going to get from point A to point B.
So a budget then can be likened to a map, as you said, that can get you from point A to point B. Okay, now, based on what you said, we need to have a budget whether you're rich, poor, or in between.
Exactly. Even if you're unemployed.
Even if you're unemployed. Now, that's probably startling to some of our viewers. Even if you're unemployed, you need a budget. Why?
Because bills don't go away. Expenses don't go away. And if anything, at that point in time, you have to manage your financial resources even more than when financial resources are plenty. At that point in time, you're working off of managing the finances that you do have over whatever period you believe you might remain unemployed and trying to make those finances stretch. So you have to identify ways in which you cut back if that's necessary, or ways in which to manage how you're going to spend the funds that are available to you.
Okay, now we've established that we need a budget. Now, where does one start?
One can start. There are many places that you can start depending on what your financial circumstances are. Most of us are currently spending money. So the first thing we can do is take a retrospective look at where we're spending that money. Depending on where we're spending it, we'll highlight some areas that we may want to adjust things in or do things differently. The other place to look is what we're bringing in. Most of us are working off of a fixed amount that comes in from month to month. And based on that, we determine how we're going to use those funds throughout the course of any particular period of time.
Okay. Now, some of us are paid weekly, some of us are paid every 2 weeks, some of us are paid monthly. So how do you make a budget with with the various pay periods?
Well, we should think about not just how those funds are coming in, but also how they're going out. Because you have expenses that are monthly expenses, you have some expenses that may be quarterly, and you may have some expenses that are even annual. You think about things like licensing and insuring your vehicles. Those things happen once a year. However, if you plan throughout the course of the year how you're going to meet those annual payments, those things should still be factored into whether or not you do a budget on a monthly basis or even on a weekly basis. Still identifying how things that are outside of the cycle of that budget will be included. So if you do a weekly budget, you still have to think about how you're going to pay that monthly Belco bill or how you're going to pay that annual car licensing bill. But those things you can, if you're doing it by week, you can divide those things by 52 so that you're accounting for accumulating those things over a period of time. If you do them on a monthly basis, I would suggest if you're getting paid monthly that you do a monthly budget. I prefer monthly budgets just because that's the typical cycle of how funds go out, even if we get paid on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Funds typically go out on a monthly cycle.
Yeah, and that answers my question. I really appreciate that. Most of our bills, be it Belco, be it cable, or whatever it is, it's monthly. Most of our bills are monthly. So you're saying in terms of setting a budget, even if we get paid weekly, in terms of sending out the funds, it could be done on a monthly basis in terms of the budget.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I want to say, though, budgets are very personal. And to prescribe one way of doing a budget may not be necessarily the best for everybody. We all spend a little differently, we all earn differently, we all save differently, we all have different plans and goals as it relates to our finances. So one should take a look at how they want to manage their finances and determine based on that what is the best way to manage that, and as such, preparing a budget.
Okay, very good. I'm paid monthly. Both my wife and I are paid monthly, so we pay our bill monthly. But that doesn't necessarily have to be. Some people, are you saying some people may be paid monthly, but they may choose to do a weekly or bi-weekly budget?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They may decide, even though they get paid monthly, to pay one bill during week 1 of a month, another bill week 2 or week 3 of a month. It all depends on how someone chooses to manage it. The objective, though, is to manage your finances well.
Okay. Now, let me ask this question. Husband and a wife, they're sitting down. Well, when you're married, should you make your budget together as a husband and wife team, or should the wife make the budget and say, here, husband, or should the husband make the budget and say, here, wife?
I would never say that one should prescribe one onto the other. I believe it is a collective process. The home is there to be happy for both individuals. So those finances contribute to the home as a whole. So it should be a collective discussion. Mind you, that doesn't mean that one person may not take on the core responsibility of crafting that budget. However, I would say final sign-off on that budget should not be down to one individual out of those two. Okay. It should be a collective sign-off and give and take and compromise in various areas in order to ensure that both individuals are satisfied and comfortable with the final budget.
Since your wife is probably watching, I think that was a very good answer. Now, I've heard the acronym SMART, S-M-A-R-T, and I am not sure what it means, and maybe some of our viewers have also heard the term. So could you explain that to us, please?
SMART is an acronym that's used around financial planning as it relates to setting goals around your budget. Your budget should be based on a goal. As we stated earlier, we're looking at getting from point A to point B. So if you consider point B to be the goal of your financial planning, then we're talking, SMART talks about the goals as it relates to managing your finances. Those letters in that acronym SMART stand for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So to work through each of them, the S being specific means that that goal must be specific, meaning that if your goal is to save for retirement, then it should be save for retirement to have X number of dollars. But we develop goals throughout the course of our financial path. So we'll have maybe one overall goal that relates to our savings. We may have another goal that relates to our vacation. So we'll have goals throughout there, but they must be specific. The second being measurable, meaning how are we progressing towards reaching that goal? So if our goal is to save for a vacation, how much is that vacation going to cost us would be the specificity of that goal. Measurable would be how much money do we need to have and how are we progressing towards achieving that. So being measurable means how are we progressing towards having that money over the course of a specific period of time.
Right.
The A, being achievable, means that we must be able to reach that goal. So that being achievable means that you can't plan a vacation that's going to cost you $20,000 if you're only, and you want to achieve that within the next 3 months if you're only making $1,000 in that period of time. So it must be achievable. The R being realistic, meaning that it is something that you can truly get to. Not just on the achievable side, but something that's actually relevant to you as an individual. And the final letter, T, being timely. So it must be time sensitive. It doesn't make sense saying, I want to save for a vacation, and not saying when you want to take that vacation.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, in terms of doing a budget, Are there any type of instruments that can help someone do a budget? I know somebody can probably write down Belco, cable, telephone, and then put what it costs. But I understand that there are internet on the internet. There are devices that can help you. So, what are some ways that we can do this?
There are lots of tools out there, and tools that have progressively become more intuitive, more user-friendly in some instances. But we have to think back. People have been doing budgets from the beginning of time when they've been transacting various activities. If it were them selling sheep, they were still managing how they were using their resources. We've progressed to an age where both of us are sitting here with tablets in front of us, that there are programs and things available that work on these, or computers, or even a sheet of paper, like you said. Some individuals will use a sheet of paper, and that works for them because they like that tangible, tactile budget in their hands. So, writing it out on a piece of paper is fine. Others will use spreadsheets such as Excel, but then Excel scares some people because they actually have to get into the nuts and bolts of trying to get it to work for them themselves. There are other tools that are for home computers, such as Quicken or QuickBooks, are two examples that quite a few people use, that have been developed and are used over time, that have become quite easy to use. It's as easy as writing a check in a checkbook, and it accumulates all of the categories that you're spending in and things like that. So there are lots of tools available, and as I said before, budgets are personal, so finding the tool that's right for any particular individual is also very much a personal decision.
Okay, we're coming down to the end. Tracking one's expenses. What are some benefits in doing that?
Tracking expenses is key to budgeting. You have to know where you spent in order to make adjustments over the course of time. A budget is a living document or a living tool, in that having a budget today does not mean that you're going to have that same budget next month. Now, that doesn't mean that you say, well, I want to spend extra money on eating out this month, so I'm going to tweak my budget so that it fits my spending. A budget is to help reinforce and help us to use our money wisely. However, it has to be a learning tool as well. So we have to learn from how we've spent in the past to ensure that we make better decisions and manage our finances better going forward. Yeah. That may mean, if you look at your finances and your spending, if you look at it retrospectively, you may say, wow, I have no idea that I spent, X number of dollars last month or even last year on dining out. So that may influence how you manage your eating out budget during the upcoming period. So you may look and say, wow, I cannot afford, or I'm shocked really at how much I spent on dining. Yeah. If that's the case, then you're going to adjust that down, and you're going to adjust your pattern and the way that you manage yourself around that. Yeah. We've seen how tracking one's expenses are very important. We've been talking with Lamel Burch, a certified public accountant, who has given us some very good advice in terms of budgeting. One thing I'm going away with is that even if you're unemployed, you need to have a budget. Lamel, we thank you for being with us, and we will see you on Issues next time.